we want to discuss research we have done on personality traits, which we define as a stable part of the personality. Some people conflate personality traits and emotions. By our definition, emotions are temporary and situational. People react emotionally to an event or a situation. They get angry about something or sad, then it goes away. But personality traits do not easily go away, and people bring them to every situation. If we can go on to the next chart, there has been a lot of work by academics on personality traits, back one please, that indicate their importance in consumer decision making. We have not seen them used as much as they should be, in our opinion, by financial services companies in their marketing and communications. When they have been used, their value has been evident, and I will give an example at the end of my remarks. That is why we want to bring this topic forward. Also, we have recently conducted some research which has not been released before, which we think provides new insights on the impact of personality traits on investing. I would like to start by citing some comments by academics. After that, my associate Anne Rapino and I will present some research findings, and I'll conclude with comments on why we think that's important. On to the academics. John Narver, a leading researcher at the University of Washington, wrote, latent or implicit needs and solutions are defined as needs and solutions of which the consumer is unaware. Latent needs are no less real than expressed needs, but they are not in the consciousness of the consumer. V. Kumar wrote, positioning a product's features and benefits among the consumer's expressed or explicit needs is relatively straightforward. However, competing firms are already aware of consumers' explicit needs and benefits, and just focusing on them could lead to a loss of competitive advantage. So we have things that are implicit that people are not aware of, and one of the things that drive decision-making that people are not aware of are personality traits. Moving on to the next chart. Claire Lisa Ackerman wrote, research conducted over the past 20 years of social psychology suggests that most decision-making and social behavior take place without the individual being aware of them. Consumer behavior research, however, is still largely dominated by a cognitive approach according to which decisions are made deliberately. In other words, a lot of our research in the consumer side is ignoring a part of explained decision-making that is invisible to what we're measuring. And finally, Kumar again, behavioral finance theories explain how people make investment decisions that are either suboptimal or irrational due to underlying human emotions and tendencies. Since investors are typically unaware of the impact of such emotions, it's important to uncover the type and degree of various emotions that could adversely influence optimal behavior. And I think Kumar is pointing to something that is important, because so far we've been talking mainly about the impact of personality traits on the invisible but important impact of personality traits on consumer decision-making. But if we go on to the next chart, I think it's especially important for those of us who are interested in life insurance and investments, because life insurance and investment company offer solutions that impact financial security and vulnerability, that involve risk and uncertainty, that are complex, and a lot of people have to rely on other people for information or how to understand them. And things which have danger or risk or can affect people deeply bring forth emotions. And those are the things where personality traits can have a more important impact. And that's why, although measuring personality traits is important in all areas, it's especially important in life insurance and investments. And with this, I would like to turn over to Anne Rapino, a research director at Greenwald & Associates, to talk about some research we've recently conducted.
Great, thanks, Matt. Quincy, if we could change, thank you. So I want to focus what I'm going to talk about on research Greenwald & Associates conducted and around personality traits. And to do this, we conducted both a factor analysis and regression analysis to get at what these key personality traits and also some interesting outcomes related to financial decisions. So if we look at the next slide, I want to just pause for a second before going into the findings and provide some background. The research I'm going to talk about is based on a survey we conducted last fall, and it was of the pre-retirees and retirees ages 55 to 75 years old. And the survey was primarily broken up into two parts. The first, we were identifying the key personality traits, and two was focused on outcome variables. And this included things such as advisor use, decisions respondents would make in certain financial situations, and interest in investment products. So to get at these personality traits, we asked a multitude of agree-disagree questions, and we focused on three main areas. First was the big five personality traits, and these are extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, and openness. And these five traits were identified by psychologists to be the key underlying traits that make up an individual's personality. Next, we included an adaptation of the emotion quotient, and these are also five personality traits, but these were identified by research done by Prudential, and it was used to understand emotions that influence retirement investment decisions. And lastly, we added many other traits that we suspected could influence financial behavior. And we developed these traits and identified them by doing extensive literature review, as well as findings from our own prior research. And just a couple examples of traits we included are tendency to worry, ability to adapt, loss aversion, and if the respondent enjoyed managing their finances. So if we could go to the next slide. You heard I just listed a lot of personality traits, and we actually ended up including 47 in the survey. Clearly, this is a lot to work with, so to make this more manageable and the findings more useful, we conducted a factor analysis to see if there's any underlying patterns or groupings to these traits. Through this process, we identified 12 key factors that are listed on this slide. And just as an example, so you can kind of see what went into the factors, if we look at disciplines, the second one listed, this is made up of the personality traits dependable, strong sense of commitment, resourceful, and believing goals are achievable if they work for them. But in order to see what influence these traits and factors have on financial decision-making, we ran a series of regression. And this type of analysis allowed us to see which personality traits had an impact on the array of outcomes that we included in the survey. So in the next few slides, I'll highlight just a few of the findings that came out of this analysis. So on this slide, the first outcome I'm going to discuss is product interest. We wanted to test how all of these personality traits and factors mapped onto different products. So we asked about 3 different products. The first on the left-hand side is one that has no limit on gains or loss. We have sort of a middle ground, and this does have limits, but it's still a very wide range. And on the right-hand side, we asked about a product that guarantees no loss, but caps gains to 4%. So a couple key takeaways that were particularly striking to me. The first was that in this age group, risk-taking has a positive impact for not only the product with no limits, which is pretty intuitive, but also the product in the middle. And it's only when loss is completely taken off the table that we see risk-taking as a negative predictor to product interest. And this was pretty surprising to me. I kind of assumed and thought that conventional wisdom would have risk-taking, those who are more risk-averse being interested in the middle product instead of those risk-taking. So it's kind of the opposite of what I thought there. And the second takeaway for me was that short-range focus comes into play and is a driver of interest for both products that limit gains. And this is just something to keep in mind when thinking about who these types of products might be most appropriate for. And just one thing to remember is that this survey was among people 55 to 75 years old. So on the next slide, the second set of outcomes I want to discuss from this research is particularly relevant this year. So we asked, if there was a major economic downturn and your investments lost 30% of their value in a 2-month period, how likely do you think you would be to react in the following ways? And we asked about the likelihood of selling stocks, cutting spending, increasing saving, becoming anxious about their financial future, and firing their advisor. So clearly back in the fall of last year, we had some foresight because this scenario is very relevant to what has happened in 2020. And we really think advisors and other financial professionals can use this knowledge to reach out to their clients who may need it most right now. So for instance, knowing that individuals who fall into the factors of makes changes or short range focus, that they're more likely to sell stocks in this situation can really enable an advisor or plan sponsor to talk about how this action may be detrimental in the future. And by reaching out to the right people and creating targeted, personalized messaging to these groups can really be beneficial, especially in a situation like we saw earlier this year. And another way these traits can be important is being able to communicate to different groups effectively. So for instance, knowing who might be extra anxious about their financial future, these professionals can reach out to them, anticipate what they might be feeling, and it could be a much more personalized conversation that can go a long way. And we're hearing a lot about consumers reaching out more frequently to their advisors right now. And this type of insight can really help develop a deeper and more meaningful relationship. And just one last thing I want to touch upon is that these regression results I presented hold constant demographics like assets, gender, and education. And these typically are how we would segment a lot of our research. And not that that isn't important, but it just goes to show that the research we did around these personality traits really matters. So it's holding constant all these other things, and we still see all these influences on just these two outcomes. So it really can allow for more effective segmentation than traditional demographics can deliver. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Matt for some more examples.
Thank you very much. The next thing we want to address is this tendency for personality traits to cluster. And so we did a cluster analysis. And if we could actually go on to the next chart, the basis for what I'm going to present is a survey we did in 2016 as part of our Retiree Insights program. 1,200 people, basically 60 to 75 with investable assets of at least $100,000. And we took these findings and put people into groups where they were as alike as everyone else in their group and as dissimilar to people in every other group. And if we go on to the next chart, using 8 personality traits, which in 2016 is what we were working on, which you see listed here, we found 5 groups. And I'm not going to discuss all of these right now, although glad to discuss it with you later. But just to give you a couple of examples, the most populated group were the strugglers, 23%, who tended to be low in extroversion. They were introverts. Anything blank is average, were not open to experience, but they had difficulty coping. They were pessimistic and they were inert. They're not what we would like to be, as opposed to the positive extroverts who were more of what we'd like to be. Extroverted, agreeable, conscientious, emotionally stable, open to experience, and tended to be optimistic, not pessimistic, and action-oriented, not inert. So if we need to be aware in any communications of who we're talking to, you do have to talk, as an example, somewhat differently to these 2 segments of consumers. And just giving one example of why this is important, if we go on to the next chart, looking at these clusters that we identified, we see in terms of when offered the choice between an investment option with risk and one with protection against risk, we see a pretty wide range going 27 percentage points from the stable positives who are most open to the investment with risk to the strugglers, 17% who were open to the investment option with risk. When we look at their actual asset allocation, the range is not 27 percentage points, it's 7 percentage points. We're offering basically the same recommendations to each of these personality clusters and less successful in meeting the needs of some. If we were more informed by their personality traits, we could do a better job of meeting their needs. Moving forward to the next chart, I'd like to just address a little bit about why this matters. And first start off with a case study, getting on to the next one. We had an assignment, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I will say we were asked to determine the target market for a solution our client had generated that offers a guarantee. And through our segmentation analysis, we found that their solution was most appealing to two segments. One were a group of people who were basically just say conscientious, confident, capable. They saw the solution as playing a useful function in their overall portfolio, of having strategic importance based on an assessment of how it fits in to their whole approach to investment risk. The second one were emotional, they were pessimistic, they were fearful, they were loss averse, they were inert. They didn't think this through. This solution helped them in an emotional way to avert their fear of loss, and it did not require action because the guarantee protected them against having to take action in a market downturn. So obviously, understanding those two segments helps in this targeting marketing, which has to be very different, same solution, but two different approaches, two different communications, two different sets of proof points. Moving on. We feel that if you measure personality traits, you can have more effective segmentation, you can have more effective messaging, a greater ability to persuade because you're focused on really what drives people. You can have more effective measurement of investment risk tolerance and more effective investment strategies, and you can develop more effective tools. And I'd just like to give one example of that. V. Kumar, working with Prudential, developed a tool that measured risk of behavioral risk, the risk of reacting negatively to a market downturn. And that was used, that tool was used as part of a selling process that, and according to an article in Marketing Science by Kumar and Shah, led to, by the way, if you're interested, I think it was volume 30, number 4, Marketing Science, led to a lift of $451 million of additional sales of variable annuities. So measuring and effectively using personality traits can be effective and we think should be used more. And we hope this information has helped. And we therefore open this up to any question or comments anyone may have.
So Matt, while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I think you clearly just highlighted the advantages of doing this, but my question would be like, how can advisors identify which clients or prospects, anyone they might be marketing to, if they have certain traits or are in those clusters you discussed?
Yeah, I think that thank you. I think the goal there is to be able to identify quickly and readily who's who. And a lot of times, I think with just a little bit of training, advisors can identify people. The other issue, and we've worked with some clients on that, in just being able to ask a small number of questions, 3 or 4, and with that can put someone in a segment and therefore be guided by that. I think it's also useful for companies to know which segments that they're targeting to. Just give you one hint. If you're working with advisors, through advisors, you tend to be marketing to extroverts because extroverts are more likely to work with advisors, and introverts are more likely to want to do things themselves and not rely on other people. Any other questions?
So it looks like we have one that's asking about implications for fiduciary selections of QDIAs in 401k settings.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. I appreciate that. I'm not sure that that would be the a good application of this, because when you're talking about QDIAs, I think you're talking about trying to appeal to the broad range of people. And I think in that case, a segmented approach is not the most effective. So that is one.
We have another question about the tools that we would suggest to identify these behaviors. And I think, obviously in our research, we used a survey questionnaire, and the personality traits parts, really, it's agree, disagree. It's pretty easy to answer. I know when I was doing this research last year, I took a Big Five personality quiz myself just because I was curious. So there's like easy ways to develop a questionnaire tool and send it out to clients. And right now we're so online that it could really be seen as a good way to engage with your current client base as well as prospects. And I think it could actually be a way to stand out right now. Everyone I think is getting tons of emails, webinars, all these things. And by offering some sort of, hey, take this questionnaire, and it's a fun one, could be a different way to engage.
If I could add one comment, I think there's one tool that is tends to be suboptimal. I've looked at a number of investment risk tolerance questionnaires, and I think they've often been developed seemingly by attorneys who are trying to reduce the risk of being sued by informing people, hey, we told you that your investment could go down. I don't think they're that effective in identifying segments and really driving discussions and recommendations. So I would suggest looking at them, seeing what they're trying to accomplish and what they're measuring, and how they can be more integrated into leading to certain more effective types of materials, proof points, and discussions. So I think that that's a tool that's used, that's out there, that deserves a review.
Yeah, I agree. And these type of personality questions can take that so many steps forward.
And I should say, one of the things we've tried to do with our factor analysis is try to identify the 12 traits which we think are most impactful of investing decisions. And things starting with those might be a useful thing. But I think it's possible to have less than 12 questions to be able to guide further conversations. Anything else? Well, we have a couple of minutes left. Anne-Marie, any other thoughts about how financial professionals can use this perspective in this environment?
Yeah, I think we both kind of touched on it a little bit already, but as I said, we're all being hit with a lot of emails and webinars, and I don't know about you, but for me, like a lot of them aren't relevant. It's one mass email to everyone. And I think if you were able to identify who falls into these type of factors and personality traits, it's an easy way to have a more personalized message, which all of our research shows everyone wants something more personalized. And it's hard to give each individual person, each individual client something personalized, but this would be a way to do that. And it's a way to do that when we can't meet face to face and we can't develop relationships in the same way. And sometimes, there's obviously great benefits to doing things online, but sometimes you lose some of the nuance in relationships. And I think by using some of these tools and findings, you can still develop and cultivate new and existing relationships.